Montana Territory in the late 19th century. At dawn, the Tobac Rut Mountains were covered with a crust of ice that crunched beneath boots. The air, at over 15 meters, stung like a hungry beast, and the seasoned miners did what they always did. Log cabins with mud chinking, shingle roofs, and a chimney tall enough for the fire to draft the standard recipe from the unwritten guide. But then Jack Thornton arrived, much too late for those winters, and instead of putting up walls, he walked up to a giant fir. He placed his hand on the bark, worn down by centuries, and said softly, "A house? Go ahead and laugh, but you'll freeze. You won't make it 2 nights, even badgers have more sense." And he, without arguing, drove a stick with an iron tip into the ground, a gift from a Blackfoot friend. Then he started digging around the trunk. This caused a scandal in the camp. They built upward, he dug downward. They looked for height, he looked for depth. They held on to what they knew, while he wanted to listen to the mountain. First, the obvious thing happened. The ground under that fir was not waterlogged like the ground in the clearings. It was soft, dry, cushioned by ages of decomposed needles. Then something puzzling occurred that didn't make sense to anyone. The deeper he dug, the less harsh the cold felt. "This is alive," he whispered. It wasn't poetry, it was physics. The Earth's temperature remained almost stable year-round, just a little more than a meter underground. When the temperature outside fell many degrees below freezing, below the surface, the gauge hardly shifted. Jack outlined a small rectangle, sufficient for sleeping upright and storing necessities, using the tree as a full wall on one side. He carefully avoided the main root, digging around it instead. While others perceived barriers, Jack recognized natural water runoff paths. Where others considered dampness, Jack saw potential for heat retention. Excavating took Jack less time than his neighbors spent collecting and assembling logs, and every dig with a shovel validated his instinct. Long before human presence, the mountain had already addressed the challenges of winter. If you enjoyed this video, please subscribe. However, excavation is just one aspect of the tale. The remaining part involves completing the air circulation loop. Jack had learned this lesson through harsh, first-hand experience. Within a spacious cabin, warm air rises and escapes. The chimney draws out more heat than it generates, and the ground robs warmth from your feet. Thus, he created a straightforward ventilation system, a brief intake channel placed just below the bed height, creating a cold air sink. Above, he placed a small vent opening off-center to prevent wind from forcing smoke back into the dwelling. Cool air enters from beneath, while heated air ascends and gradually escapes. Not an airflow that chills you, but a gentle breeze that doesn't extinguish the flame. The roof demonstrated sheer creativity, using only the resources at hand. Dozens of young saplings cross 4 straight logs that are thin yet flexible. Above that, a bed of branches with needles facing outwards, capped by bark pieces overlapping like roof tiles. True luxury, the sort provided by the mountain itself. These layers block the wind, repel water, and when snow falls, support the load without caving in. A living room was not what I sought. I desired a dome capable of enduring January's white silence. As they worked, the veterans observed and scoffed, saying a fireplace built on the ground floor will asphyxiate you. Dampness will seep upward through your walls, and the moment the first storm strikes, you'll be buried. Yet, when the first snow arrived, nothing detrimental occurred. Actually, the outcome was the reverse of their predictions. The snow lay atop like a coverlet. It did not soak through, nor leak, nor drip. It remained motionless, strengthening the insulation as though winter had inadvertently become an ally. And then arrived what inevitably follows, the major cold snap. Not merely a single bitter day, but consecutive ones. The sort where the wind, instead of blowing, slices, and pails of water appear as hard as stone at dawn, and then emerged the comparison that everyone dreaded. Inside the log cabins, regardless of how heavily they stoked the coals, the temperature stayed at freezing or just above. The earth was frozen. Each exhale turned into a misty puff. It was impossible to sleep, since the fire needed to be fed every couple of hours. Inside the hollow tree, Jack was able to keep a calm heat, sufficient to take off his gloves for a short time while working. Sufficient to allow him to sleep through the night without worrying about frostbite on his toes. How on earth do you manage that? With fingers that had lost all feeling, he released one. He answered, I don't actually do it. Nature accomplishes it, as long as you don't try to force it otherwise. That is what occurs. The lofty cabin resists. Against winter, it's losing on every front. The floor saps warmth, the walls expel air, and the chimney consumes a whole day's labor. Yet a different outcome arises when you minimize the space and lean against a massive tree that retains heat. By burrowing just deep enough to reach a constant temperature, the calculations shift, and that phenomenon occurs. Snow transforms from foe to friend, providing a cost-free layer of insulation. The rest continued to rely on raw power, extra firewood, larger logs, more mud to seal gaps. Jack wagered on orientation and timing, reducing heat loss, less space, less hubris. When the snowstorm hit, burying paths and shoving mules into fences, the finest cabins became refrigerators lit by fire. The hollow in the tree, however, functioned like a mountain's throat, breathing gently, temperate, and free of harshness. The moisture, the main concern, never materialized. The layer of old pine needles functioned as a sponge that regulated moisture. The primary roots acted as drainage channels, carrying water off, and the bark served as a waterproof covering. Instead of condensation forming on a wooden wall, there was equilibrium here. This wasn't sorcery, it was harmony. When the second snow fell, the fun ended. An elderly man came forward, feeling ashamed, and remarked, "I assumed you were excavating your own burial site." Jack grinned. That was a sleeping chamber. A man stepped inside, and taking a single breath, his physical being revealed what his conscious thoughts refused to accept. Within that space, even if the thermometer indicated otherwise, when breaking, life caused no pain. The debate was no longer about whether a tree hollow was honorable, cultured, or suitable for primitive people. The true debate was this: will you continue tossing logs upward just to warm the air inside a poorly insulated enclosure? Or will you master the skill of allowing the mountain to perform half of the labor on your behalf? Here's what occurs. If you keep yelling at winter, winter compels you to raise your voice even more. However, if you speak softly to it using its native tongue, soil, living timber, snow, then winter, albeit reluctantly, pays attention. Meanwhile, as the cabins emitted smoky coughs and weary men fought the stove every 2 hours, Jack honed his tools. He prepared meals with composure and slept without interruption. He lacked 4 shiny walls and a peaked rooftop. He possessed only one concept: to collaborate with what had already been functioning long before any instruction books existed. Many weeks went by, and winter descended upon the mountains as a heavy mass. Snowflakes ceased to fall. Instead, crystals came down. The wind howled continuously, and the nights felt endless. The cabin stoves had blue flames, consuming logs each hour. Yet the cold still prevailed. Outside, the temperature fell to -30 degrees. Inside the cabins, thermometers only showed around 5 degrees above zero. The men slept fully clothed in their boots, with numb fingers, and still awoke shivering. Jack, however, stayed in his tree hollow, calm, hearing the wind batter the exterior but unable to enter. The air within stayed steady, as though the mountain shielded him with an unseen arm. The ground, blanketed in a thick layer of dry needles, held a weak yet steady warmth. During the worst hours, when the storm was fierce, the interior remained above 5 degrees Celsius without any fire, and merely a few embers in a tiny iron stove could bring the temperature up to 20 degrees. The key was in the thermal mass of the tree and the earth. The deep roots served as a thermal anchor, linked to the stable ground where cold cannot reach. The trunk, as thick as a stone wall, absorbed warmth by day and released it gradually by night. The hollow, only about 2 meters across, warmed up fast and lost heat slowly. Jack had transformed a natural refuge into an ideal thermal capsule. The men in the camp could not comprehend it. They had watched him place his bed within the hollow trunk and close the opening with just a hide curtain. And now, while they endured the winter, he labored peacefully, unhurried, without a cough, without skin chapped by the ice. It was on an afternoon that Miller, the very person who had laughed the most, made up his mind to visit him. Making his way through the falling snow, he reached the enormous fir tree and knocked on the branch-covered entrance. Jack welcomed him inside. The interior air felt warm and clean, carrying a subtle scent of resin. Miller removed his gloves. He was incredulous. "This makes no sense," he uttered. "There is no insulation, no high chimney, and no wall here." A smile spread across Jack's face. "When you have a giant, a wall becomes unnecessary." He clarified that the tree handled everything for him. The thick bark served as a natural insulating layer. The roots prevented moisture from seeping in. The wood itself was breathable, enabling air circulation without condensation. Every night the temperature would self-regulate. As snow piled up on the branch and bark roof, the insulation became even better. Nobody anticipated that much-mocked hollow would also endure the harshest storms. During one such storm, the wind ripped off half of the camp's roofs and caused an entire cabin to collapse. Jack's shelter, however, didn't shift at all. As the wind swept across, the tree absorbed its force, preventing it from penetrating within. That evening, the men who sought shelter with him experienced a sensation unfamiliar for weeks: complete quiet. While the wind howled externally, the only sound inside was the gentle crackling of the embers. Jack clarified that his selection of that specific tree was intentional. Any ordinary tree trunk wouldn't have sufficed. He sought out an ancient fir with deep roots, one that had a natural cavity created by a lightning bolt many years earlier. The inside of the wood had been hardened by that old fire, making it non-porous. Far from weakening the tree, the lightning strike had transformed it into something like organic stone. This burnt composition was superior in reflecting heat compared to any normal piece of wood. He utilized that characteristic to build an uncomplicated system. Positioning a compact iron stove directly opposite the blackened interior wall, he ensured the heat would bounce back to the middle. During the most frigid nights, while others would burn an entire tree for fuel, Jack used only a small bunch of dry twigs. "You don't need to generate new heat," he explained. "Simply stop it from leaking away." The refuge turned into a legendary story among the camp inhabitants. They referred to it as the Tree Cave. Even though it was not actually a cave, it was a hybrid creation, part man-made, part natural growth. People who had previously ridiculed him now came around, asking for guidance. A few attempted to replicate his method by excavating cavities in downed logs. Yet no one obtained the identical outcome. The key lay in the selection of the spot, the dimensions, the alignment, the nuances that Jack had grasped through observation rather than imitation. He demonstrated his approach for sealing the opening, not with a hard door, but using cascading layers of animal skin, fabric, and twigs, so the cold air didn't rush in all at once. Instead, it seeped in gradually. He additionally demonstrated his tiny ventilation system, a bark pipe protruding from the top of the trunk. This vent could be opened or closed using a flat stone. By doing so, he managed airflow while preventing heat loss. Throughout the remainder of winter, as the cabins groaned, became smoky, and echoed with lowing sounds, the tree hollow turned into a sanctuary for multiple people. Space was limited to just 2 or 3 individuals, but that sufficed. Others started constructing their own versions based on his concept, excavating near tree trunks, strengthening with branches, and topping with snow. And while none matched the coziness of the first shelter, all acknowledged that the improvement was enormous. As March came, daylight increased, and the snow started to thaw. The valley had the scent of dampness and fresh soil. The men emerged from their cabins with frostbitten skin, chapped lips, and rough, split hands. Jack stepped out of his hollow well-rested, sporting a clean beard and unblemished hands. The difference was stark. Inside his makeshift treehouse cabin, he endured the decade's most severe winter with less exertion and less firewood than anybody else. Thermometers at the camp verified that whereas the cabins had average indoor temperatures between 5 and 7 degrees Celsius, Jack's shelter remained near 40 degrees Celsius, a 3-5-degree gap. If you enjoyed this video, please subscribe. Word of this extended past the valley. The traders who came in the spring to sell goods inquired about the tree man, who was unaffected by the cold. A few dismissed it as an overblown story. Yet the miners were certain of its truth. They had witnessed his dwelling endure ice, snow, and gales, with no fire ever harming it. Jack never saw himself as a genius, merely someone who liked to watch and learn before acting. He claimed that winter isn't something you fight. You come to terms with both it and the tree. The quiet giant that guarded him had become his partner in that unseen agreement between humanity and nature. As spring arrived, the thaw carried the noise of streams flowing through the valleys and the far-off rumble of mountain peaks releasing their snow. The camp's men, deeply tired after following months of severe cold, started taking apart the cabins that the ice had wrecked. A few had split at their foundations. Others, bloated with dampness, sagged like weary elders. Yet amid the disorder, Jack's dwelling remained upright, concealed within the same tree that had protected him through the entire winter. What once appeared as a crazy dark cavity had now become a valuable lesson. One by one, the men went inside, feeling the bark walls, sniffing the arid timber, and using their fingers to confirm there was no further dampness. The floor stayed solid and mild, the walls untouched, and the stove had only faint traces from Eloyan. "This isn't a shelter," Miller remarked. "It's a living cavern." Jack grinned and consistently gave the same reply. "I didn't create this. The tree already understood how to endure winter well before I got here." Over the next few weeks, as the valley became muddy and the stream swelled, the colonists started constructing new dwellings, taking inspiration from Jack's living space. Several people excavated beside fallen trunks to utilize their timber as organic insulation. Other individuals strengthened the sides of their huts using twigs and strata of soil. However, the Beddoes miracle was never completely duplicated, and a factor that many were unaware of caused that. Jack didn't imitate a model. Instead, he interpreted a language. Far from being merely a barrier, the tree functioned as a living power source, its sap in dormancy, its dense bark, and its extensive root network. All elements collaborated to sustain a localized climate, steady. Within, the atmosphere was thicker, saturated with ambient moisture that stopped the fire's aridity from fracturing the timber. Snow on the exterior compacted against the trunk, filling every gap and enhancing thermal protection. Whereas others focused on constructing sturdier walls, he discovered a method to build more intelligently. Upon arriving in May to document the effects of winter, the district inspector observed an unusual detail. Every conventional cabin experienced structural deterioration, yet the tree refuge nicknamed as such by the miners stayed livable. He featured it in his report as a case study of effective adjustment to harsh environments. It never occurred to him that this section would be studied years later by engineers investigating the interaction between organic materials and thermal conditions. Jack never bragged. He didn't regard himself as an inventor at all. According to him, he merely had the fortune to encounter the perfect tree and the willingness to heed the forest's message. Yet inwardly, he recognized that it wasn't chance, but reasoning. For centuries, the forest had shielded its inhabitants from identical winter conditions. Bears, foxes, and owls alike took refuge in cavities, root systems, and underground dens. Why would he act differently? That concept lingered in his mind. Everything that functions has already been crafted by nature. Our task is simply to replicate it humbly. As the first gentle days came back, the camp's men arranged a goodbye feast. Laughter had taken over the mockery. A few recalled with amusement the words they'd said to him on that initial day. "You'll freeze. You'll die in 3 nights. The tree will crush you." But now those same words were uttered with admiration. They gave him wine, dried meat, and a gift more precious than gold: acknowledgement. Jack told Miller, "This winter, you've demonstrated a lesson not found in any handbook." "It wasn't the winter," he responded. "It was the tree." During that summer, as temperatures climbed and the woods turned a lush green again, Jack chose to remain near his refuge. He never went back to the mining operations. He made that spot his permanent home and upgraded the doorway. He built a tiny porch using branches and layered fresh bark over the roof. Even on the hottest afternoons, the interior stayed cool at roughly 20 degrees, whereas outside, the temperature soared past 35 under the blazing sun. This very shelter, which had rescued him during winter, now shielded him from summer's heat, an ideal equilibrium. By year's end, a team of forestry engineers from Helena journeyed to the location to examine its construction. They recorded every factor: heat, moisture, air circulation, and resistance to wind. They verified what the miners had long understood. The cavity in the tree kept an average temperature gap of 35 degrees between its interior and the exterior, in both winter and summer. For its era, that was truly remarkable. Unknowingly, Jack constructed the inaugural biothermal refuge in the American West, a home that harmonized with the environment instead of opposing it. The subsequent winter arrived with milder conditions, yet the camp's men stopped constructing cabins. Adhering to Jack's guidance, they constructed their dwellings nearer to the earth. They were partially submerged, shielded by aged timber, and blanketed with strata of moss and bark. After many years, not a single one of them suffered losing a home because of the cold. He aged in tranquility beside his fir tree, having learned the forest lesson. He had no desire to fell the tree or be apart from it. According to him, that trunk bestowed something invaluable: comprehension. Each winter, upon the arrival of the initial frigid breeze from the north, he would sit beside the hearth. He would rest his back against the trunk wall. He would remark, "With sufficient attentiveness, nature forever reveals survival strategies." Those acquainted with him claimed that, during the harshest winters, the little chimney of his abode emitted minimal smoke. Some assumed the fire had extinguished, but reality was otherwise. The warmth had no necessity to exit. Jack's dwelling turned into a myth. Mountain crossing travelers recounted the tale of the individual who challenged all by residing within a tree and emerged triumphant. As time passed, his identity faded, yet his concept endured. Presently, over 100 years on, architects crafting environmentally conscious homes still apply his principle, leveraging thermal mass, coexisting with the surroundings rather than opposing them. Jack Thornton passed away peacefully, and an evening in winter, the heater turned off, yet the inner fire continues to blaze. Snow descended gently and quietly outside, blanketing the woods in white, yet the interior stayed cozy, though it was 35 degrees outdoors. And as the breeze murmured through the fir trees, it appeared to utter what every person discovers too late. The person who constructs the toughest doesn't always prevail. Occasionally, the one who builds in harmony with nature, not opposed to it, comes out ahead. Hit subscribe if you enjoyed this.